Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. Winter 1866, a small village in the Austrian Empire. The first cannon blast shook the earth like thunder, though the sky above hung clear and crystalline blue. Beatrice Thorne did not flinch. She had grown accustomed to the sounds of war. The battle had raged for 3 days now, barely 10 miles from the village, transforming her father's modest country estate into an impromptu hospital. Every room from the parlor to the servants' quarters overflowed with wounded soldiers, men whose blood soaked into centuries-old oak floors, while Beatrice and the other women worked tirelessly to save what lives they could. "More bandages, please," called an elderly nun, her hands already crimson to the wrists. Beatrice gathered clean linen from the dwindling supply and hurried down the corridor. At 23, she was no stranger to hardship. Her English mother had died when she was 16, leaving her to manage the household for her scholarly father, who had settled in this remote corner of Austria to study ancient manuscripts housed in the nearby monastery. The war between Austria and Prussia had seemed a distant concern until the armies arrived, bringing destruction to their peaceful valley. "They're bringing more wounded from the northern ridge," her father announced, appearing briefly in the doorway. Professor Thomas Thorne looked exhausted, his spectacles slipping down his nose. "The monastery has opened its doors as well, but there are too many." A civilian coach was caught in the crossfire. Beatrice nodded grimly. "I'll prepare more space in the west wing." As dusk approached, the stream of wounded continued. Beatrice worked methodically, moving from man to man, cleaning wounds, changing bandages, offering water, and whispered comfort. Her dark blonde hair had escaped its pins, and her once white apron was now stained beyond recognition. "Miss," called one of the local women assisting her. "They've brought someone important, a civilian, they say, but the soldiers are being very secretive." Curious despite her exhaustion, Beatrice followed the woman to the small library, which had remained relatively untouched by the medical chaos. 2 imperial officers stood at attention beside a makeshift bed where a man lay motionless, his head bandaged and his right arm splinted. Unlike the common soldiers crowded elsewhere, this man had been given privacy and his own guard. "The doctor has seen to his immediate wounds," one officer informed her stiffly. "He requires careful attention, but discretion as well. He is to be registered as Lieutenant Ludwig Neumann." Beatrice studied the unconscious man. His face, though partially obscured by bandages, appeared refined, strong jawline, straight nose, and surprisingly smooth hands for a soldier. "What happened to him?" "Ambush," the officer replied curtly. "His coach was attacked. He suffered a blow to the head and a broken arm. The physician believes he may experience some memory confusion upon waking." "And why is he here rather than with the other officers?" The 2 men exchanged glances. "Security concerns. The lieutenant was on a sensitive mission. We'll post guards, but we require someone trustworthy to tend to him directly." Before Beatrice could respond, her father appeared, looking uncharacteristically serious. After a hushed conversation with the officers that she couldn't quite hear, he turned to her. "Beatrice, my dear, I believe you should personally oversee Lieutenant Neumann's recovery. It would be a great service to the Empire." Something in her father's tone made Beatrice suspect there was more to this request than mere patriotic duty, but with dozens of men suffering throughout the house, she had little time to question it. "Of course, father. I'll see to him." For 3 days, the man called Lieutenant Neumann remained unconscious, stirring only occasionally with fevered murmurs that Beatrice couldn't decipher. She bathed his brow, changed his bandages, and sometimes read aloud from books of poetry she found in the library, speaking softly in both German and English. The guards remained posted outside the door, changing shifts every 6 hours with military precision. On the 4th morning, as Beatrice was replacing the compress on his forehead, his eyes opened suddenly, startlingly blue and momentarily disoriented. "Where?" His voice emerged as a dry rasp. "You're safe," she assured him in German, reaching for a glass of water. "You're at Thorne House. I'm Beatrice Thorne." He struggled to sit up, wincing at the movement. "How long have I been here?" "For days. Please, don't exert yourself." She helped him take a sip of water. "You've suffered a concussion and your arm is broken. The doctor says you need complete rest." The man looked around the room, his gaze sharpening with each passing second. The battle, what news? It's moved eastward. The Prussians have withdrawn from this immediate area, though we hear fighting continues near the border. She studied him carefully. The officers said you might experience some confusion. Do you remember your name? A shadow crossed his face. Hesitation, or perhaps pain. Ludwig Neumann. He finally said, though something in his delivery struck Beatrice as practiced rather than recalled. Lieutenant Neumann, then. You should rest now. The doctor will return this evening. As she turned to leave, his uninjured hand caught her wrist with surprising strength. Thank you, Miss Thorne, he said, his accent betraying education beyond that of a common officer. I fear I'm imposing greatly on your household. We're all doing our duty in these difficult times, she replied, gently extracting her wrist. The entire house is full of wounded men. Then I apologize for taking up a private room. Those were your officer's orders, not mine. She offered a small smile. Though I imagine my books are better company than groaning soldiers. Something like genuine amusement flickered across his face. Perhaps you're right about that. Over the next week, as Lieutenant Neumann's strength gradually returned, Beatrice found herself increasingly intrigued by her mysterious patient. Unlike many officers she had encountered, he spoke to her as an intellectual equal, asking about her education and listening attentively to her responses. He read voraciously from her father's library, showing particular interest in works of philosophy and history. You're very well read for a soldier, she remarked one afternoon while changing his bandages. He smiled faintly. I had another life before the army. What sort of life? A more sheltered one. His eyes met hers with an intensity that made her hands falter momentarily. Tell me about you, Miss Thorne. An Englishwoman in this remote Austrian valley must have her own story. A rather dull one, I'm afraid. My father came here to study ancient texts when I was 12. After my mother died, we simply stayed. She carefully rebandaged his head, noticing how the wound was healing well. I've had a patchwork education. English literature from my mother, history and philosophy from my father, and German from necessity. And nursing from war, he added softly. Yes. She stepped back, suddenly conscious of their proximity. Though I pray that skill becomes unnecessary soon. As January deepened into February, the fighting moved farther away, though wounded men continued to occupy much of the house. Lieutenant Neumann improved steadily, soon able to walk short distances and joined Beatrice's father for evening discussions that often continued late into the night. Beatrice noticed that the guards, while still present, seemed to defer to the lieutenant with unusual respect for a man of his supposed rank. One snowy evening, Beatrice found herself alone with Neumann in the library. Her father had retired early with a headache, and the house was relatively quiet, the most grievously wounded having either died or been transferred to more permanent facilities. Your father tells me you paint, Neumann said, gesturing to a small landscape hanging above the fireplace. Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. Amateur attempts, nothing more. It's quite good. The light on the mountains. You've captured something essential about this place. He moved closer to the painting, studying it with genuine interest. Do you miss England? Sometimes. I miss the sea. She smiled wistfully. We lived near Brighton before coming here. I used to walk along the shore for hours. What else do you miss? The question was simple, yet no one had asked it of her in years. Music, she admitted. We had a pianoforte, and my mother would play in the evenings. Here, there's only the church organ on Sundays. She glanced at him. What do you miss, Lieutenant? From your life before the army. A complicated expression crossed his face. Freedom, he said after a long pause. The ability to walk unnoticed through a city park or marketplace. Were you so recognizable? She asked, puzzled. He seemed to catch himself. My family was known in Vienna. Local prominence creates its own small prison. Before she could question him further, he changed the subject. The doctor says I might remove this splint next week. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough. You're hardly an imposition, Beatrice replied, surprised by her own disappointment at the prospect of his departure. Besides, the roads are still treacherous with snow. Nevertheless, duty calls. He gazed into the fire. This interlude cannot last forever. No, she agreed softly. I suppose not. That night, Beatrice found herself unable to sleep, troubled by thoughts of the lieutenant's impending departure. In the weeks of nursing him back to health, She had come to look forward to their conversations, his insightful observations, and even his rare smiles that transformed his serious face. She told herself it was merely the prospect of returning to the isolation of rural life after the intensity of the past weeks, but she knew the truth was more complicated and far more dangerous to her heart. The following morning brought unexpected visitors, a party of imperial officers, more elaborately uniformed than those who had initially accompanied Newman. They arrived in ornate carriages despite the snow-covered roads, creating a flurry of activity throughout the house. Beatrice was summoned to her father's study, where she found Professor Thorne looking uncharacteristically agitated. "Beatrice, my dear, I believe there are some matters we must discuss regarding our guest." He cleared his throat. "It seems Lieutenant Newman is not precisely who we were led to believe." Before he could continue, the door opened, and one of the newly arrived officers entered, bowing formally to Beatrice. "Miss Thorne, His Imperial Majesty requests the honor of your company in the library." "His Imperial Majesty?" Beatrice repeated, certain she had misheard. The officer's expression remained impassive. "Emperor Leopold II wishes to express his personal gratitude for your care during his convalescence." The world seemed to tilt beneath Beatrice's feet. "There must be some mistake. I've been caring for Lieutenant Newman." "There is no mistake, Miss Thorne," her father said gently. "It seems we have been hosting the Emperor of Austria himself, traveling incognito when his coach was attacked." Stunned, Beatrice allowed herself to be escorted to the library, her mind racing to reconcile the quiet, thoughtful man she had nursed with the ruler of the vast Austrian Empire. The library had been transformed in the hour since she'd last seen it. Imperial guards stood at attention, and elegant furniture had somehow materialized to replace the makeshift sickroom arrangements. And there, standing by the window in an immaculate uniform adorned with medals and imperial insignia, was the man she had known as Lieutenant Newman. Without the bandages and simple clothing, his bearing was unmistakably regal, yet his eyes, when they met hers, were the same that had watched her so intently as she read poetry aloud during his recovery. "Your Majesty," she managed, attempting an awkward curtsy. "Miss Thorne." His voice was warmer than his formal appearance suggested. "I believe I owe you both an explanation and my profound gratitude." "I don't understand," she said, finding her voice. "Why the deception? Why here, in our remote house?" He gestured for her to sit, then dismissed the other officers with a subtle nod. When they were alone, he remained standing, looking more like the lieutenant she had known than the emperor he truly was. "I was returning from secret peace negotiations when my coach was attacked," he explained. "It was imperative that neither the Prussians nor certain factions within my own government discover my whereabouts. Your father's house was chosen precisely because of its isolation, and because Professor Thorne's reputation for discretion is well known in certain circles." "My father knew." "Not initially. He was informed of my identity only after the first week, when it became clear my recovery would take longer than anticipated." He moved closer, his expression softening. "You, however, were kept in the dark for your own protection. What you didn't know, you couldn't inadvertently reveal." Beatrice felt a complex mixture of emotions: confusion, embarrassment at her unguarded conversations with him, and an inexplicable sense of loss. So everything was a necessary fiction. My identity was concealed, yes. But our conversations were not fiction, Miss Thorne. His eyes held hers with the same directness she had come to expect from Lieutenant Newman. Indeed, they were perhaps the most honest exchanges I've had in many years. Few people speak to the Emperor as they would to a simple lieutenant. Had I known, you would have been formal and deferential, measuring every word. A faint smile touched his lips. Instead, you challenged my opinions on Goethe, criticized my impatience during recovery, and once told me quite firmly that I was stubborn as a mountain goat. Despite herself, Beatrice felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "I apologize for the impropriety, Your Majesty." "Please don't." He moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered valley. "Tomorrow I must return to Vienna and the burdens of the crown. These weeks of anonymity, despite the circumstances, have been illuminating." "I'm glad your recovery progressed well," she said formally, already rebuilding the walls of propriety between them. He turned back to her, and for a moment, she glimpsed vulnerability in his imperial countenance. Miss Thorne, Beatrice, I find myself reluctant to leave this place. Not merely because of the peace it offers, but because of the companionship I found here. Her heart stuttered. Your Majesty, Leopold, he said quietly. At least when we are alone. I've heard my name so rarely these past years that I sometimes forget the sound of it. That would be impossible, she whispered, knowing she should resist this dangerous intimacy, but unable to retreat. I must ask something of you. He approached slowly. The peace negotiations I was conducting, they remain critically sensitive. I need someone I can trust absolutely to carry certain documents to Vienna. Someone whose movements would not attract attention from either Prussian agents or my own ministers. You wish me to be a courier? I wish you to be my ally in securing a peace that could save thousands of lives. His gaze was steady. But I will not deceive you. It would mean leaving your father's house, perhaps for an extended period. Why me? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Because in my weakest moments, you showed me kindness without agenda. Because you see clearly and speak honestly. Because I trust you, Beatrice Thorne, more than many who have sworn oaths to my throne. The following day passed in a blur of preparations. The emperor departed with great ceremony, his imperial entourage creating a spectacle for the village. To maintain appearances, Beatrice remained at Thorne House, ostensibly continuing her nursing duties for the few remaining wounded soldiers. Only her father knew that in 3 days' time, she would travel to Vienna, officially invited to serve as a lady companion to the emperor's elderly aunt, Archduchess Sophia. Are you certain about this journey? Professor Thorne asked as he helped her pack a small trunk. The imperial court is a nest of vipers compared to our quiet life here. I'm not certain of anything, Beatrice admitted. But I cannot refuse this request. Not when peace hangs in the balance. Her father studied her face. Is it only duty to peace that motivates you, my dear? She turned away, unable to answer truthfully even to herself. Vienna in late February 1867 glittered with imperial splendor despite the war. The Hofburg Palace, with its labyrinthine corridors and Baroque grandeur, both awed and intimidated Beatrice as she was escorted to the Archduchess's apartments. She had been given new clothes appropriate to her supposed position, modest but finely made gowns that felt foreign against her skin after years of practical country attire. Archduchess Sophia, aunt to Emperor Leopold II, proved to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s whose fragile appearance belied a formidable intellect. "So you're the English Rose who nursed my nephew," she said after dismissing the servants. "He spoke highly of your discretion and courage. His Majesty honors me with his trust," Beatrice replied carefully. The old woman's eyes twinkled. "Yes, I believe he does. Now listen carefully. Your official duties are simple. You'll read to me, accompany me to certain functions, and manage my correspondence. Your unofficial duties are far more important." Over the following weeks, Beatrice learned the complex choreography of imperial court life. By day, she was the quiet companion to the elderly Archduchess, nearly invisible to the courtiers and ministers who paid their respects. By night, she sometimes received sealed messages delivered by the emperor's most trusted aide, which she then encoded using a cipher the emperor himself had taught her before her departure from Thorne House. She saw Leopold rarely and always at a distance during formal court functions. In these settings, he was every inch the emperor, remote, authoritative, surrounded by advisors and supplicants. Only occasionally would his eyes meet hers across a crowded ballroom, a flash of recognition passing between them before court protocol reasserted itself. Spring arrived, bringing with it rumors of both continued fighting and peace negotiations. Beatrice found herself increasingly drawn into the Archduchess's confidence, learning the complex political currents that flowed beneath the glittering surface of imperial life. "My nephew is walking a dangerous path," Sophia confided one evening as Beatrice brushed the old woman's silver hair. "There are those in his government who would prolong this war with Prussia indefinitely, believing victory still possible despite our losses." "And the emperor disagrees?" Beatrice asked, careful to maintain her neutral tone. "Leopold sees what others refuse to acknowledge, that the empire cannot sustain this conflict without devastating consequences." The Archduchess sighed. "He has always been too visionary for the court's comfort. Even as a child, he questioned traditions others accepted without thought." Beatrice's hands stilled. "You knew him as a child?" I practically raised him after his mother died. Sophia's eyes grew distant with memory. He was a serious boy, always with a book in hand. His father thought him too bookish for a future emperor and tried to beat the scholar out of him. Her mouth tightened. It only drove Leopold's true nature deeper inside, behind that imperial mask he wears so well now. The conversation left Beatrice contemplating the man behind the crown, the same man who had discussed philosophy with her father and admitted to missing simple freedoms like walking unrecognized through a park. In early April, Beatrice received an unexpected summons to the imperial study, not through intermediaries but delivered by Leopold himself, who appeared suddenly in the Archduchess's sitting room while Beatrice was reading aloud. "Aunt, I must borrow Miss Thorne for matters of state," he announced after the formal greetings. Sophia raised an eyebrow but waved her hand in permission. "Try not to scandalize the court entirely, nephew." As they walked through the private corridors of the palace, Leopold maintained a proper distance, though his voice softened once they were beyond the hearing of guards and servants. "You've adapted well to court life," he observed. "I've merely followed the Archduchess's guidance," Beatrice replied. "She's been most kind." "Kind is rarely a word associated with my aunt," he said with a hint of amusement. "Formidable, certainly. Intimidating, absolutely. But she seems genuinely fond of you, as I am of her." They reached the imperial study, where Leopold dismissed the guards with orders not to be disturbed. Once alone, the transformation was subtle but immediate. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and something of Lieutenant Newman returned to his expression. "I've brought you here because we've reached a critical juncture in the peace negotiations," he said, moving to a large map spread across his desk. "Prussia has agreed to preliminary terms, but certain factions of my own government are actively working to undermine the process." Beatrice stepped closer to the map, noting the military positions marked in red and blue. "Your Majesty, I'm not sure how I can be of service in such high matters of state." "Leopold," he reminded her quietly, "and you've already been of immeasurable service. The communications you've helped relay have kept the negotiations alive." He hesitated. "But I need something more from you now, something that carries significant risk." "What is it you need?" "For me to sign the preliminary peace agreement, I must travel to Prague next week. Officially, I'm making a brief religious pilgrimage. Unofficially, I will meet with Prussian representatives." His blue eyes held hers intently. "I need you to accompany the Archduchess's party as cover for your actual purpose, carrying the final encoded terms that cannot be trusted to regular diplomatic channels." Beatrice felt the weight of his request. "Why not use your official diplomats?" "Because I suspect at least one member of my diplomatic corps is reporting to those who wish the war to continue." His expression darkened. "There have been leaked communications, missed connections, too many to be coincidence." "And you believe I can succeed where trained diplomats have failed?" "I believe you are beyond suspicion, loyal to peace rather than political ambition, and more clever than anyone at court gives you credit for." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Also, I've seen firsthand how stubborn you can be when pursuing a worthy goal." Despite the gravity of the situation, Beatrice felt a warmth spread through her chest at his faith in her. "I will do whatever is needed to secure peace, your Leopold." His eyes softened at her use of his name. "Thank you, Beatrice." He moved away from the desk, pacing slightly. "There is something else I must tell you. Something few at court know." "What is it?" "The peace terms include my agreement to a political marriage, an alliance with Bavaria through Princess Johanna." He spoke with careful neutrality. "It will strengthen our position and help stabilize the region after so much bloodshed." Beatrice felt as though the air had been pulled from her lungs, though she maintained her composure. "Congratulations, Your Majesty. Such alliances are important for the Empire's future." "Yes," he said, watching her closely. "They are necessary sacrifices for the greater good." "When is the wedding to be announced?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "After the peace treaty is signed. Within a month, if all goes according to plan." He stepped closer. "Beatrice, you need not explain, Your Majesty." She retreated behind formality like a shield. "I understand the duties of your position perfectly well." Something like pain flickered across his face. "Do you?" "Because there are moments when I myself struggle to reconcile the Emperor's obligations with the man's desires." The journey to Prague unfolded without incident, though Beatrice remained vigilant. the sealed documents hidden within a false bottom of her traveling case. The Archduchess's party provided perfect cover, an elderly royal making a pilgrimage to famous religious sites, accompanied by ladies and servants. No one would suspect that the quiet English companion carried papers that could reshape the future of Europe. Leopold traveled separately with his official entourage, maintaining the fiction of a brief spiritual retreat. Beatrice caught glimpses of him during formal ceremonies at Prague Cathedral, his imperial regalia glinting in the candlelight as he knelt in prayer before the assembled nobility and clergy. On the third night in Prague, as she was preparing for bed in the modest room she had been assigned in the royal apartments, a soft knock came at her door. Opening it cautiously, she found not a servant but Leopold himself, dressed simply in a dark coat without insignia, his imperial guards nowhere in sight. "Your Majesty," she gasped, instinctively glancing down the corridor. "This is most irregular." "I've dismissed the guards for an hour," he said, his voice low. "May I come in? It concerns the documents." Hesitantly, she stepped aside to admit him, acutely aware of the impropriety and danger of entertaining the emperor alone in her bedchamber. He seemed to share her discomfort, standing awkwardly near the door rather than advancing into the room. "The exchange will happen tomorrow," he said without preamble. "Not through official channels, but during the public procession to St. Vitus Chapel. You'll be approached by a woman selling flowers. When you purchase from her, she'll provide a replacement stem containing confirmation from the Prussian delegation." "I understand." Beatrice moved to her traveling case. "I have the documents ready." As she knelt to retrieve the hidden papers, she was startled to feel Leopold's hand on her shoulder. "Beatrice, wait." His voice had softened, losing its imperial authority. "There's something I must say before tomorrow changes everything." She stood slowly, turning to face him, suddenly aware of how close they stood in the small room. "Your Majesty?" "In all my life," he began, his eyes searching hers, "I have never been known as simply myself. Always a prince, an archduke, an emperor, titles that separate me from genuine human connection." His hand moved as if to touch her face, but stopped short. "Except with you, during those weeks at Thorne House. You saw me, Leopold, not the emperor, perhaps for the first time since I was a child." "It was only because I didn't know who you were," she replied, her heart beating painfully against her ribs. "No," he said with quiet certainty. "It was because of who you are. Your kindness, your intelligence, your unwillingness to flatter or dissemble." His voice dropped lower. "In another life, where I was simply a man and not an empire personified." The unfinished thought hung between them, filled with impossible longing. "But we don't live in that life," Beatrice whispered, forcing herself to step back. "Tomorrow you secure peace for your people, and soon you will marry for the same noble purpose." "Yes." A shadow crossed his face. "The emperor will do his duty, as he must." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "But Leopold, the man you nursed back to health, the man who found his truest self in conversation with you, he will remember always what might have been." Before she could respond, he took her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, a gesture so intimate it sent a shiver through her entire body. "For peace," he murmured against her skin. "For peace," she echoed, her voice barely audible. The exchange the following day proceeded exactly as planned. Beatrice, walking several paces behind the Archduchess during the public procession, purchased flowers from an elderly woman who pressed a particular bloom into her hand with meaningful intent. By nightfall, the preliminary peace terms had been secretly signed, though the public announcement would not come for several days. Their return to Vienna brought a flurry of activity as the court prepared both for the formal peace declaration and the subsequent imperial engagement announcement. Beatrice found herself increasingly withdrawn, performing her duties for the Archduchess mechanically while preparing herself mentally for departure. Once peace was established and Leopold's engagement announced, her presence at court would no longer be necessary, or wise for her heart's protection. "You're a fool if you leave now," Archduchess Sophia declared one evening as Beatrice helped her prepare for bed. "My nephew may be emperor, but he is still a man, and men often make noble sacrifices that satisfy no one. I don't understand your meaning, your highness. Don't play innocent with me, child. I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one notices." The old woman's eyes were sharp. and I've seen how this impending Bavarian marriage weighs on him like a death sentence. His Majesty understands his duty to the Empire, Beatrice said carefully. Duty? Sophia snorted. I've watched generations of Habsburgs marry for duty and live in misery thereafter. Leopold's own parents despised each other cordially until death mercifully separated them. What would you have me do? Beatrice asked, her composure finally cracking. He is the emperor, and I am nobody, a foreign commoner who temporarily served a purpose. You are the woman who saw him as a man first and an emperor second. Sophia replied more gently. Do you think that happens often in his life? She patted Beatrice's hand. Wait until after the peace announcement. The engagement negotiations may yet prove complicated. 2 days later, Vienna erupted in celebration as peace with Prussia was officially declared. Casualties had been severe, territorial concessions painful, but the war that had bled the empire was finally ended. Amid the festivities, however, a curious silence surrounded any mention of the rumored Bavarian marriage alliance. Beatrice, attending a court reception beside the Archduchess, found herself scanning the crowd for Leopold. When she finally spotted him, surrounded by ministers and foreign dignitaries, she was struck by how isolated he appeared despite the throng, an island of solitude within the sea of celebration. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, their eyes meeting across the crowded ballroom. For a brief moment, the mask of imperial composure slipped, revealing a depth of emotion that made her heart constrict. Then he was moving through the crowd toward them, courtiers parting before him like water. Aunt. He greeted the Archduchess formally, bowing over her hand. Miss Thorne. His eyes lingered on Beatrice. I trust you are both enjoying the celebration? Peace suits the empire well, Sophia replied. Though I hear there are complications with certain diplomatic arrangements. A shadow crossed Leopold's face. Indeed. Perhaps Miss Thorne might accompany me for a turn about the room? There are some diplomatic matters on which I would value her perspective. The Archduchess waved them away with a knowing look that Beatrice studiously ignored. As they walked slowly along the perimeter of the ballroom, maintaining a proper distance while hundreds of eyes tracked their movement, Leopold spoke quietly. The Bavarian negotiations have collapsed. Beatrice nearly stumbled. What? How? Princess Johanna has apparently formed an attachment to a Prussian diplomat during her time in Berlin. His voice held a note of wry amusement. She wrote to me personally, apologizing for the diplomatic inconvenience while essentially begging to be released from our arrangement. And you agreed? Beatrice asked, careful to maintain an expression of polite interest for the watching courtiers. With surprising alacrity, he admitted. My ministers are already scrambling to find a suitable replacement, but I've informed them that state marriages require mutual consent, and I intend to be rather difficult to please. They had reached a set of doors leading to a small balcony. With a subtle nod to his guards, Leopold led her outside into the cool spring evening. Here, partially screened from the ballroom by heavy curtains, they could speak more freely. Beatrice, he said, his voice dropping the imperial formality. I know you've been planning to return to your father's house now that peace is secured. She looked away, toward the gardens illuminated by moonlight. My purpose here is fulfilled. The Archduchess has many who can serve her. And if I said there was another purpose that required your presence? He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. A more personal purpose? Her heart thundered in her chest. Leopold, you know it's impossible. You are the emperor, who lost his heart to the woman who treated him as a man. He took her hands in his touch sending sparks along her skin. The woman who argued philosophy with him, who called him stubborn, who read poetry to him when he couldn't sleep for pain. The court would never accept. The court accepts what the emperor commands, he said firmly. But more importantly, I don't want merely to command your presence. I want to earn it. His blue eyes searched hers. I'm asking for time, Beatrice. Time for us to know each other in this world of court and duty, not just in the sheltered paradise of your father's library. And if that time only confirms what we both know, that an English commoner has no place as more than a passing fancy for an emperor? His expression softened. Then at least we will have answered the question that has haunted me since I left Thorne House. What might have been possible between the wounded soldier and the woman who healed him? The moon cast his face in silver light, reminding Beatrice of those quiet nights during his recovery when he had been simply a man in pain, and she simply a woman offering comfort. In that moment, the gulf between their stations seemed both vast and insignificant compared to the connection they had forged. Time, she agreed softly, though I make no promises beyond that. His smile, rare and genuine, transformed his face. I would expect nothing less from the woman who once informed an emperor he was being unreasonable about taking his medicine. Summer passed into autumn, and autumn into winter. At court, rumors swirled about the English companion who had somehow captured the emperor's attention. Some speculated she had used witchcraft. Others whispered of political machinations or scandalous secret liaisons. The truth was both simpler and more profound. In the private gardens of the Hofburg, in quiet moments stolen between affairs of state, Leopold and Beatrice rediscovered the connection that had begun in a makeshift sickroom. He shared with her the burdens of rule that he could speak of to no one else. She challenged his thinking and offered perspectives from beyond the insular world of court. Their relationship deepened, strengthened by the very constraints that might have destroyed a less patient love. On Christmas Eve 1867, as snow fell softly on Vienna, Leopold led Beatrice to the Imperial Conservatory, transformed for the evening into a winter garden filled with white roses and candlelight. "What is all this?" she asked, gazing in wonder at the scene. "A memory made real," he said, gesturing to a small table set with tea and the very books of poetry she had read to him during his recovery. "You once told me you missed the music from your childhood." From behind a screen of exotic plants, a string quartet began to play, the same compositions her mother had loved, which Beatrice had mentioned once in passing. "Leopold," she breathed, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "There's more," he said, leading her to a small fountain at the center of the conservatory. There, floating among water lilies, was a small velvet box. "Earlier today, I met with my council to announce my intention to marry." Beatrice froze, her hand halfway to the box. "You've chosen a princess after all?" "I've chosen you, Beatrice Thorne," he said simply. "If you'll have me, not just the emperor, but the man you saw beneath the crown." With trembling fingers, she lifted the box from the water and opened it to reveal a ring of stunning simplicity, a single perfect sapphire the color of his eyes. "The council," she began, "will adapt," he finished firmly. "There were objections, of course. Traditions cited, precedents quoted. I reminded them that an empire fighting for its modern survival cannot be bound by medieval conventions." His eyes held hers. "I also reminded them that an emperor who sacrifices his personal happiness for political expediency becomes a bitter ruler, and history has seen enough of those." "And your aunt?" Beatrice asked, a smile beginning to form on her lips. "Threatened to haunt anyone who opposed the match, with particular vindictiveness from beyond the grave." He laughed softly. "I believe her exact words were, 'If you fools prevent my nephew from marrying the one woman who makes him human, I will ensure your eternity is most unpleasant.'" Beatrice felt joy rising within her like a tide. "You're certain?" "Truly certain. I have never been more certain of anything in my life," Leopold said, taking the ring and holding it poised before her finger. "I was a wounded soldier when we met, stripped of title and privilege. You saw me clearly then, and you see me clearly now. Will you stand beside me, Beatrice? Not just as my empress, but as my partner, my conscience, my heart." "Yes," she whispered, watching as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Though I warn you, I may still call you stubborn when the situation warrants it." "I would expect nothing less," he murmured, drawing her into his arms for their first true kiss, one that held both the memory of who they had been when they met and the promise of who they would become together. In spring of 1868, Vienna witnessed a wedding unprecedented in Habsburg history. Not a cold political alliance, but a love match between an emperor and the common-born woman who had once nursed him back to health, never knowing his true identity. Tradition was honored in the ceremony's grandeur but broken in its heart, setting a new course for an empire learning to balance ancient heritage with modern necessity. And if court chroniclers noted that Emperor Leopold II smiled more frequently than any Habsburg monarch in living memory, they attributed it to the success of his peace initiatives rather than to the quiet conversations he shared each evening with his empress. Conversations that began in a country library during wartime and would continue in perfect trust and understanding for all the years to come.